Welcome to another English Sparkling with Tweedy video. Different location for a change. Thought it might be nice to have a bit more of a view and there's a bit less walking involved. It's Friday afternoon / early evening. Still in this habit. I always seem to want some English fizz on a Friday early evening. Old habit from the times when I used to have a proper job. The cellar racks were looking a little bare actually, so I did my usual kind of putting it off till the last minute and then started racking my brains around lunchtime today, where in London, the eternal problem, I could find some English sparkling wine. I remembered from a few years ago that the Foodhall in the John Lewis on Oxford Street actually had a really good selection by London standards of English sparkling, so I headed down there. There's that, is it Barbara Hepworth sculpture on the outside, and the Foodhall down in the basement. Slightly confusing because the English wine selection was sort of split into two bits. There is a sort of wine department within the Foodhall, and there were a few shelves there with a already pretty decent selection, but then there was another set of shelving, I don't know, in amongst the cheese or something that had sort of more products they were trying to promote, and in amongst that there was seemingly even larger selection of English sparkling. Really delighted to even see Breaky Bottom there as well. That's something I don't think I've ever seen in a shop in London before, but for today I fancy something slightly different. So this, to me, is a new producer. Just about heard of them, but have never tried their wine before. They're called Busi Jacobson. They call it Cuve Brut. It's a 2019 vintage. I think this is about the third vintage they've released. Relatively newly established wine. I think it's only been going since about 2015. They're based in East Sussex. It's the Weald rather than the Downs, so a little bit further north in East Sussex. The label and everything's all rather smart, quite eye-catching on the shelf there. I think it would be fair to say at least some English wine producers have not always the most stylish of packaging, which is, you know, it's fair enough. They're quite often cottage industries effectively, but that's all part of the charm, I guess. Didn't talk about the blend, did I? I believe this is a Chardonnay dominant blend. It's something like 60% Chardonnay. Is it 60, 25, 15? I'll put it on screen. Pale gold once again. It is pretty pale. A slight twinge of green, but that could just be the background. My big fat head is probably obscuring the view here. I'm not all the way up to the top of Parliament Hill. This is, I don't know, a third to a half of the way up. But you still get a bit of a view of the panorama of London, that city that has a maddening, disinterested English sparkling wine. Capital of England, not interested in English produce. I don't know what's going on. Getting sort of citrus character to begin with. Almost slightly limey. There's a slightly bitter edge to that. I know it always sounds weird to describe an aroma as bitter, and there is probably a bit of orchard fruit mixed in with that. Green apple, I suppose. So, you know, what you'd expect from a Chardonnay dominant blend. I'm getting a little bit of sort of grassy, kind of herbaceous sort of notes. Could be environmental, sitting on the grass, but yeah, something slightly green, leafy there. I think there probably is a bit of autolytic character too, heading more towards the pastry sort of territory, but it might be short crust pastry to sort of keep it more English. On the palate, there is a nice bit of zing, relatively soft texture, I would say. The bubbles feel, at least initially, they're sort of soft on the tongue. I'm guessing somehow the Weald being probably more clay soils. This is always debated, as I say, but I'm guessing there's less minerality coming into the vines there from the soil, but some people say that's all nonsense anyway. You know, maybe I take that back now. I think on the second swig there, did start to get a little bit of something saline, possibly. So maybe there is some kind of mineral component there. Fruit-wise, again, still think more lime than lemons. That's possibly has these slight bitter edges to it, which are quite appealing. And green apple. There might be something else in the mix there. Possibly a little bit of stone fruit coming from the Pinot. So that's nice. Quite mouth-watering. I think I possibly forgot to mention before, the dosage on this is relatively low. I think it sits at just over 6 grams a litre, which is the lowest edge that you'd be able to call brut. Any lower than that, a gram less, and it would be into extra brut category. So it really is on the dry side of brut. Yeah, I guess I noticed that on the palate. I'm getting fruit character and acidity and hints of bitterness. No real sort of touches of sweetness there. It's a textbook Chardonnay dominant English sparkling. Perhaps as a treat I can just record some of the view there with a probably wonky horizon. It's impossible on a slope to get the tripod completely straight and without my big fat head in the way. I had a spillage just now. It's so impractical being on a slope without walking boots to sort of lodge the glass and or the bottle in with stemmed glasses. Ridiculous behaviour, really. I feel like I get something slightly maritime from this on the nose, something slightly sort of seasidey, which is really interesting, and I wonder if that kind of carries through to that slight salinity I found on the palate, which is interesting because, you know, this is from nowhere near the sea. It's quite a long way inland in Sussex. It's vegan as well. No animal products used, so, you know, I don't think they'd be grinding up shells to somehow filter it or fine it or whatever. It's a bit more tightly bound second glass. I mean, perhaps lower down the bottle, slightly better chilled. I'm just using that ice jacket thing. I'm getting a bit more acidity second time round, and a little bit more minerality and some more of that saline kind of seawatery sort of note. That's really interesting. How does it end up tasting of the sea when it's inland like that? Really nice bitter notes now, along with that. I think it is limey. I really want to say this is limey, the citrus character, rather than lemony. This distinction for me is the sort of some of the bitter edges to it. Something you get with lime, that there is a bitterness in lemon, but it's a different kind of bitterness, isn't it?